The subcommittee will come to order after recognizing myself and Ranking Member Deutsch for 5 minutes as soon as he shows up, each for our opening statements. I will then recognize other members seeking recognition for 1 minute. We will then hear from our witness, and without objection, Mr. Ambassador, your prepared statements will be made a part of the record. Members may have 5 days in which to insert statements and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I'd like to note for the record that the subcommittee invited the Department of Defense to send an official to testify before us this afternoon, but DOD stated that they were unable to participate at this hearing and declined to come, but we got the better of the deal because we have you, Mr. Ambassador. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes. On September 10th of last year, President Obama announced to the American public his plan to degrade and destroy the terrorist group ISIL. While making his case for America's role in the fight against ISIL, the President highlighted our strategy in Yemen and held it up as a model of success to be emulated in the fight against ISIL. Yet, about a week later, the Iran-backed Houthis seized control of the capital and the government. Despite this, the administration continued to hail our counter-terror operations in Yemen as a model for success, even though we effectively had no partner on the ground since President Hadi was forced to flee. But perhaps even more astonishingly, in what can only be described as an alarmingly tone-deaf and short-sighted, when Press Secretary Ernest was asked at a press briefing if this model was still successful after the Yemeni central government collapsed and the U.S. withdrew all of our personnel, including our special forces, he said yes, despite all indications pointing to the contrary. So where do we stand now? That's the important question. President Hadi was forced to flee. Saudi Arabia has led a coalition of over 10 Arab nations in Operation Decisive Storm, which so far has consisted of airstrikes only, but very well could include ground forces in the near future. Iran feels emboldened in Yemen because of the leverage it has gained over the administration through the nuclear negotiations, but I commend the Gulf countries, the GCC countries, for taking a strong stance against Iran and stepping up to the plate in Yemen. Despite their action, the Houthis actually control more territory now than they did before the Saudi response. Our embassy is closed, our personnel have been evacuated, and there's no Hadi government to speak of. And al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, has taken advantage of the fighting and has capitalized on the deteriorating situation in Yemen, and we have very little visibility into the movements or their actions. I'm concerned that the AQAP, the al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, has gained ground in eastern Yemen and has been left virtually unchecked to recruit and train. Let's not forget that it was AQAP that was responsible for the Paris attacks earlier this year, or that it was al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula that was responsible for overtaking a prison last month and releasing several hundreds of prisoners, including a senior operative of al-Qaeda. AQAP's leader is a follower of bin Laden, and like bin Laden, also seeks to strike Western targets, including right here in our homeland in the United States. Iran has reportedly dispatched a naval destroyer near Yemen in a game of chicken over one of the most important shipping routes in the Gulf of Aden. This area is a gateway between Europe and the Middle East, and Iran must not be allowed to escalate any tensions nor attempt to disrupt the shipping lanes. Yet we continue to see the administration make the same mistakes it made in Syria. And just like in Syria, today Yemen is in utter chaos, in large part due to Iran's antagonism and meddling. But we must learn our lesson from Syria and engage in the Yemeni crisis head-on with a comprehensive strategy before it spirals further out of control. There will be no political solution in Yemen based on the GCC initiative or restarting the National Dialogue Conference that collapsed in early 2014 without addressing the underlying issues. The Houthis were reluctant participants in the national dialogue in Yemen, but it was clear that they had no interest in ceding power over to a centralized government. As a result, they withdrew from the national dialogue, it collapsed, and the Houthis took control over Sana'a and now other areas. So why would the administration think that the circumstances have changed that would allow for a reconciliation to occur? It is naive and dangerous to believe that a political solution is achievable as long as the Houthis are unwilling to cede their power and as long as Iran continues its support for these fighters, just like it is naive and dangerous to believe that a political solution in Syria is achievable as long as Assad remains in power. Even more absurd is the fact that Iran, just this morning, has allegedly proposed a peace plan for Yemen. This is the same Iran that continues to use its terrorism tentacles throughout the region to undermine U.S. interests and by supplying arms and fighters aimed to further destabilize its neighboring countries. So today we hope to hear from the administration that we have a comprehensive plan on how to get to a political solution rather than just supporting a reconciliation process while also addressing the current gap in our intelligence and counterterror capabilities in Yemen, as well as the deteriorating humanitarian situation. Because if we act in Yemen in the same way that we have acted in Syria, then we are likely going to see the same crisis follow in Yemen. A war with no end in sight, the rise of dangerous terror groups, a dire humanitarian crisis, and Iran's increased power grab in the region. And with that, I will go to Mr. Connolly for perhaps 1 minute, because when Mr. Deutsch comes, he will give his 5 minutes. Mr. Connolly is recognized.